Well, thank you for joining us today. As you're aware, we've recently launched a consultation on a new Architect's Code of Conduct and Practice. So today we're going to talk you through what's in that presentation, what's in the code. We'll talk it through, and then we'll run some polls to see what your thoughts are, and then we'll be able to answer any questions that you might have. So I'm Rebecca Roberts-Hughes, and I'm the Director of Policy and Communications at ARB, and we'll also be joined by Simon Howard, who's the Director of Professional Standards, by one of our board members, Elena Marco. So to kick things off, we just want to do a short poll, which is going to appear on your screen now. So you should be able to see it there. How important is it to the safety and well-being of the public that architects have a code of conduct? So that will be up for another 10 seconds. So do vote on it, and then we'll discuss the results during this session. That's great, for over 100 votes so far. Great, thank you. Well, we'll reveal the results of that in a moment, and we're going to start with a presentation on the contents of the Code of Conduct. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Simon.
Afternoon, everyone. Thanks for taking the time over your lunch today to listen to me talk about the Code of Conduct. That we're just going to share some slides now. Gee whiz, I hope that people said that the code was quite important, otherwise we're all going to be wasting our time today. I'm going to take you through the proposed new Code of Conduct that's currently out for consultation. The existing code is the 2017 version, so it was kind of 2016 that we looked at it last. Really, that was a bit of a housekeeping exercise. The really substantive review of the code took place in 2011, 2012, and I'm sure you'll all agree that an awful lot has changed, both within society and within the profession in that kind of 14 or so years. Differently, if we think about all the things happened in relation to, of course, the building safety agenda that emanated from the Grenfell Tower disaster, with the climate emergency, with the sweeping changes about societal attitudes towards equality, diversity and inclusion that's happened throughout the 2010s. It's time that we have a look at the code again. Just a brief kind of introduction to what the purpose of the code is. So we have to, under the Architects Act, it's a statutory requirement, a legal requirement for us to set out the standards of conduct and practice expected of architects. It's not a set of rules. It is a code that can be taken into account during disciplinary proceedings. One of the proposals, the ideas that we have to change the code, though, comes from a lot of feedback that we've had, particularly from architects, as to how they use the code. And throughout the kind of like the last couple of years, 18 months or so, as we've been doing engagement, time and time again, architects have told us that the code doesn't really mean much to them. I was talking to an architect from Northern Ireland, actually, who said the only time they would ever look at the code is when they were qualifying for their Part 3 or if they ever got into trouble. And when I asked him why, he said, because it's just a big, long list of things that I'm not supposed to do. And that doesn't really help me in my practice. So what we wanted this to do is actually be a positive affirmation of what an architect should be, in relation to what it is to be a professional person. So the code applies to all architects, no matter what they're doing, no matter where they are in the world, and hopefully we've drafted a code that's pervasive and can speak to everyone. And as it says on the screen, it doesn't repeat the law. It's not going to tell you that, not to steal and not to commit fraud or anything like that. But it's a higher level of the standards that the architects all set for themselves. So, Finn, do you want to move on to the next slide, please? The code consists of 6 standards, down from the 12 of the existing code, and it's a lot less prescriptive. But those 6 standards are mandatory, and I'll go through them one by one in a minute. So it's a mandatory standard that says you must do this. It would then be supported by example behaviours of how each architect can achieve the standard in practice. And then sitting below that will be a suite of guidance and assistance to put a bit more flesh on the bone of the kind of things that architects would have to do or should do in order to comply with the code. So moving relatively swiftly through the standards. every standard, every architect, every code of practice, whether it be architects all over the world or whether it be other professionals within the UK, honesty, integrity is the ultimate kind of the minimum benchmark that would be expected of all professionals, and that includes architects. So standard 1 is a requirement that architects must always act with honesty and act with integrity. And the kind of example behaviours that we will publish in support of this is the importance to act impartially. That architects promote their services accurately, that they identify, recognise, manage conflicts of interest, and also kind of report breaches of the code, whether it be a breach that they've undertaken themselves or a colleague. That expectation will be there. That will be there as well. So standard 1 is honesty and integrity. Next slide, please, Finn. Standard 2 is a new standard, and this one I think that we think is really important, and this is the feedback we've had from both architects and from the public. The architects actually must act in the public interest in a way that prevents harm to others. And the two kernels in relation to this could probably be fairly described as sustainability on one hand and safety on the other. So this standard is in effect saying that architects have a higher duty, a higher ethical duty than non-professionals in relation to the public interest. So the way that this would be articulated within the code is that architects should use their best endeavours to enhance the environment in which we live. That their architects have got a duty to protect the health and safety of those who construct, maintain and use buildings, which of course is already kind of enshrined within the Building Safety Act as well, but also a responsibility to challenge others where they see their actions have fallen short, but an overall duty to act in the public interest. Next one, please, Fen. So next one is competence. Now competence is already exists in the code, but this is really strengthening the requirements that architects must maintain their competence in relation to their professional work. And it says here that good quality architecture is only delivered when architects have the right skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviours. I think at the heart of this is the importance of conscious incompetence, and that an architect, just like any professional, knows the limit of their competence and knows when they shouldn't act outside of that. I think it supports a kind of a lifelong commitment to continuing professional development, acknowledging that no architect, no matter at the stage of their career and their journey, is the complete picture, and there's always more to learn. Also, a responsibility that architects will have is when they're appointing other people to carry out work on their behalf, to ensure that they're competent to do it, and also that responsibility to supervise them. And finally, particularly in relation to those architects who have some role in leadership, is to encourage the development of others who are underneath their kind of supervision and underneath their purview, for them to develop their competence and commit to that as well. So standard 3 is competence. Moving on to standard 4, which is really then kind of the nuts and bolts of professional practice, that architects must carry out their work effectively, exercising skill and judgment. Within this will be the requirement that architects must provide written terms of engagement. This still remains the number one cause of disaffected clients and disputes, and ultimately complaints to us. For example, the idea that architects don't have adequate contractual arrangements put in place. A responsibility to act professionally when they're planning, monitoring and managing their work, to have effective quality assurance processes in place, to ensure that liabilities are covered by professional indemnity insurance, and have proper systems in place, again, to deal with complaints and disputes, and also to manage finances in a way that's responsible and appropriate. So that's standard 4, professional practice. And then standard 5 is communication and collaboration, and a recognition and acknowledgement that architects don't act alone. Good outcomes aren't created when architects act in isolation, but to note that they act as part of a design team and a wider construction team, So here is a responsibility to communicate and professionally and in a way that can be understood by different audiences. And quite clearly, an architect should be speaking to their clients in a different way that they would be speaking to colleagues or other people within the built environment. An understanding and confirmation that they understand clients' requirements, and similarly an expectation that architects will explain their role and what their and manage others' expectations as to what they should be able to expect from architects. And as I say, the responsibility to act and collaborate with other architects, other professionals within the design and construction team. And then the final standard is standard 6, which is one of respect. And this is actually the thing that came out most strongly when we did research with clients, with the public. The architects should have a responsibility to treat each other with respect. And that, of course, includes being polite and considerate, which is something that one might take for granted, but it's really important that came out when we spoke to clients. That they display a committed approach to equality, diversity, and inclusion. And I'll come on in a moment to say how that might look, because that's quite a high statement, but it doesn't really it doesn't necessarily speak to everyone. And again, for those architects with that level of responsibility to contribute, I mean, in fact, all architects can contribute to a positive and inclusive working environment. So again, it's the responsibility to work collaboratively and in a respectful way with others. Can you move on to the next slide? So just hold there for a second. So the idea of the new code is we have the 6 mandatory requirements, the standards that must be kept, and the example behaviors of how they would normally be how a normal architect would normally be able to demonstrate that. That's relatively light. And of course, there's always a requirement under this principles-based code that every architect will use their own professional judgment to meet them, rather than saying you must do this, and this. That's not the approach that we heard was helpful. But we do think that we need to provide some flesh on the bone and in guidance in relation to how an architect might approach. It might be a good idea to approach compliance with all of these standards. And if you move on to the next slide, Finn, which is the last slide, you'll be glad to know, these are the areas of guidance that we think at the moment are appropriate. Some of this guidance already published on our website in relation to dealing with professional indemnity insurance and dealing with complaints and disputes. We also think there are other areas that have come up through our engagement with others and also our experience of where architecture falls short, that we think that more guidance would be helpful. This is a really important part, though, of our consultation, because ultimately, once you've considered the code, we want to hear from you of where do you need more help? Where do you think it would be useful for us to provide some more guidance and more assistance of how you can meet the standards of the code? I think I'm going to stop talking there. I'm fairly sure I haven't got any more slides. So in which case, Rebecca, I'll hand back to you.
Great, thank you, Simon. Thanks for talking us through that. So we're going to do a couple more polls now, but first of all, the results of the first one, really positive. So the majority of you think that the code is very important. So there are the results up on the screen there. So yes, 86% felt that. So thank you for completing that poll. We're going to do a couple more now, but before we do, I just want to flag that you have the option of submitting questions. So some of you submitted questions in advance, but you're able to join in the live Q&A as part of the session, and we'll get through as many of those questions as we can. Okay, so the next poll is up there on the screen. So first of all, Simon's just talked you through all of the standards in our proposed new code. Which do you think is the most important? And of course, we think they all are, but you can only pick one in this poll. I will say that this is not the same as the consultation, so please do also complete the consultation. This is just a poll out of interest. We'd like to know which of those standards you think is the most important. And then there's another question there as well. So in your professional life, how often do you have to deal with situations where you have to make an ethical decision? Just give people a moment to complete that poll. So at the moment, it looks like the results are split in terms of the most important one. We've got competence up there, and honesty and integrity. So competence has 48% of the votes, honesty and integrity have 30. 4% would say the most important thing is the public interest. 9% of you are saying professional practice. 4% are saying communication and collaboration. No one is going for respect, not the most important thing, and 4% of you are unsure. And there's about 200 of you on the call at the moment, and we've got votes from around 160. So it's a really good figure. And then in terms of in your professional life, how often do you have to deal with situations where you have to make an ethical decision? 8% of you are saying very frequently, 40% frequently, 34% neither frequently nor infrequently, 16% infrequently, and 2% very infrequently. So those are the results there. Great, okay. So we're going to talk through an initial response to those polls. I believe my colleague Elena Marco, Professor Elena Marco, who's on the board members, is going to be joining us. Finn, have we got Elena as a panelist at this point?
Yep, she'll be joining any moment now.
Hi, Elena.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. So what are your initial thoughts on those polls? And I guess you're speaking both as a board member and as somebody who's an architect and an educator of future architects.
So I agree that competence and honesty and integrity are absolutely crucial going forward in terms of the code. For me, when I read the Grenfell inquiry and the fact that it was a national tragedy, and looking at the work that the code is trying to do in terms of our behaviors and kind of setting those foundations, having those ones very close to any decisions we make becomes more important than ever. So for me, as someone who tries to educate the best possible architects, who is a real kind of champion for architecture, seeing and also seeing some of the things that we need to do better, this becomes absolutely a critical time for us to reflect on the profession, what the profession does, what the built environment does, and also to kind of make sure that the code becomes something is embedded in every single behavior that we exhibit.
Great. Just thinking about some of the results we had just then. So, of course, RB is a regulator, so we exist to protect the public and to represent the public interest. Very few people chose public interest as the most important standard there amongst those. I wonder if you could say a few words about why that's in there and the thinking behind that.
So, as Grenfell is our kind of closer example that we have. 72 people had a significant impact, and then all the communities around that kind of have major impact. So from that perspective, that becomes the protection of the public becomes really, really important. For me, I was kind of picking up some of the things that I read in relation to our profession, and the fact that us as a profession in the inquiry fell significantly below standards reasonable to be expected. That means that in a way we failed the public in terms of some of the things that we need to do. So this work becomes more important than ever. And for me, kind of really ensuring that we educate the next generation of architects, we ensure that those ones in the register are never again in the same situation, and that we kind of ensure a profound shift in the culture and behaviors of the built environment sector is absolutely critical. And the work that the regulator can do, I think, is absolutely at the key to make sure that we unlock, especially that element of culture, and the code and culture are very much integrated.
Thank you, Elena. And then just picking up on the last poll we did just then. So we asked, in your professional life, how often do you have to deal with situations where you have to make an ethical decision? And it was quite spread across the results. So not every day for the majority of architects. I know that you're an architect who's also working as an educator. How often do you have to face ethical dilemmas, and does the code help you in doing that?
Every day, I would say. So very frequently. I think sometimes even as I was talking to some of my students in the induction that we are bringing the new cohort across kind of all disciplines in engineering, built environment, and architecture, and every decision matter wherever what is small, you know. So kind of when you are doing a detail, when you are kind of specifying materials, when you are making a decision about kind of, you know, perhaps doing things that somehow they kind of you see the behaviors that everybody does and then you don't call them out. From the point of view of how we take into consideration raising concerns when you start thinking about terms of engagement, when you start looking at building safety, or even when you choose the teams in relation to equality, diversity, and inclusion, I think becomes absolutely at the core of everything that we do. And it matters if we want to change the culture within the built environment.
Great, thank you, Elena. Well, we're going to move on to some of the polls in a minute, but I'm just going to start with a couple of the first questions that we've had in. So Simon, I'm going to come to you on this one. As we've had a question through from Mark in advance, who says, will the topics, and I assume these are the topics in the code, be taught in schools of architecture, ensuring that Part 1 students understand what it means to work within an architectural practice? And then there's also a question there about how it would be applied through CPD and across different types of practice sizes as well. So Simon, I'll come to you first on that one. If you could give an answer to that question, please.
Yes, certainly on the education point. So we changed at the start of 2024. We published a new set of competency outcomes, which is the new criteria for what somebody must achieve in order to become an architect. And at the heart of that is a requirement to as part of the kind of ethical standards and practice standards, to be able to they get taught the provisions of the code. And unlike at the moment, where really that's tackled at professional practice stage, part 3, it's going to be throughout a student's journey to understand that you can't think about other design decisions unless you also think about things like building safety, sustainability. So it's weaved throughout their education. I didn't quite catch the second part. As part of CPD, was it question on CPD? How that will be?
Yeah, it was how it would apply through the CPD that people do, and also across practices of different sizes.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's a matter for practices about how they carry out their CPD, and ultimately, it's a matter under the CPD scheme for architects that, in a way to kind of to do CPD in a way that speaks to their own practice, but certainly referring back to the code of conduct and the guidance, for example, that will follow that would certainly be legitimate. Would be legitimate continuing professional development if it reaches if it improves the way that any architect practices.
Great, thank you. We've had a couple of live questions in, so I'm going to move to those now. So one person has asked, how should people deal with challenging or disrespectful behaviour towards oneself as an architect or towards other architects? And somebody on here called Marco has asked a similar question. So they're saying it's more frequent that clients or potential clients will not show respect towards architects rather than architects being unprofessional, disrespectful. So that's one person's opinion there. Simon, how should architects deal with unprofessional and disrespectful behaviour when they experience it?
Well, I think one of the things that we know that's missing at the moment is clear avenues about how architects can raise concerns about poor behaviour they see, either from between themselves or from others. So one of the proposals for the guidance is going to be some specific guidance on raising concerns and whistleblowing, particularly if you see it. Because I think it's an architect's responsibility to call it out, certainly within their practice, even if they're not the victim of it, because others may be less able to do that. So we'll be issuing particular guidance on that. We know that's a missing element from the existing code.
Great, thank you. Elena, would you have anything to add to that?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because it's about speaking up, and sometimes it's very difficult to do it in the moment. As I said, kind of as Simon has said, having avenues for kind of being able to report that safely becomes really important for all of us. But also is having champions about kind of those behaviors across the profession and role models. So when we start thinking about mentoring, leadership, what is acceptable, what is not, for me, that also will help the profession moving forward. And it's absolutely, I can't remember the name of the person who posed the question, but I think it's absolutely right. Sometimes the behaviors are completely unacceptable for kind of different stakeholders. And it's also how you are able to step up and kind of, and speak up in behalf of what should be kind of, should, in my view, the kind of the underpinning of our code and what should be the underpinning of any professional relationship.
Thank you, Elena. So another question that we've had in live, so somebody said, I think that the proposed guidance notes, putting more meat on the bones, will be very welcome by practitioners. When will they be available for all of the 11 topics mentioned? So that's a question that one person has asked. A lot of you are asking that at the moment. And I think it's really pertinent to the question we've just discussed as well. What does respect look like? What does challenging unprofessional behaviours look like? So Simon, could you give us an update, please, on when we can expect to see those 11 guidance documents?
Yes, certainly, and the answer is not all at the same time, because some of the guidance already exists. We know that, for instance, guidance on professional indemnity insurance and things like that. We know that some of the guidance in relation to, for example, terms of engagement, which is really important, is already, a lot of that already exists within the current code, so we'll be taking it out of the code. But there are some elements that we're going to need to do a lot of work on, because it can't just be a case of us sitting in a dark room and deciding what it should be, and we'll want engagement from the profession, certainly in relation to things like building safety and sustainability, and elements such as that, and leadership, and elements such as that. So I think the most important thing is, first of all, through this consultation, for us to have a clear understanding from the profession what guidance they would find useful. And we're not going to produce guidance on everything all the time, because I don't think that would be appropriate for us as a regulator. We don't tell you how to be an architect. What we're trying to do is help you comply with the code. So the short answer is some will be published straight away because they're already existing. Some will be worked on with the profession and will publish then. And then some, it may well be that we haven't started on it because we haven't yet understood that it's needed.
And presumably we will consult on any that we haven't previously written and brought in.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. So I've got a really interesting question that was submitted in advance by Richard. So Simon, I'll come to you first, and then it'd be great to hear from you as well, Elena. So Simon is asking, what does the architect get right at the moment? And can this be used as the foundation for appraising what architects do? So yeah, what do architects get right? And I suppose that's something we've looked at in writing the code, isn't it?
I mean, it's always difficult to ask a regulator what an architect gets right, because we tend to see when architects get wrong, that's when people approach us. Architects get a huge amount right. There's a huge amount of quality within the profession. And I know that kind of at the moment, the profession is probably in a quite dark place for the reasons that Elena said. But for example, on sustainability, there is so much difference that architects can make, and they're probably unique within the built environment to have the skills, the knowledge, the experience, the behaviors to be able to deliver that. So we want to be able to facilitate that. And it's not just us, of course, it's the kind of with our colleagues over it, with the professional bodies, the RIBA, the RAS, the RSUA, and those in RSAW in Wales as well, for us to work in partnership to do that. But architects have a huge amount to offer. We just need to make sure that that's channeled in the right way and at the right times.
And of course, we did some research into public and client perceptions of architects in advance, didn't we? And I think it's worth saying that the code isn't trying to correct any wrongs here. We know that architects do a great job. In fact, most of the clients who took part in that research had really positive things to say about their experience of working with an architect. But the public want and expect really high standards, and part of our role is to set out what that looks like. So it's not necessarily because something has gone wrong. Elena, can I bring you in on that question as well, please?
I was going to kind of echo what Simon said. We do amazing. I have worked with amazing professionals across my career, and I have seen others with reputation in terms of how they behave, and the behaviors that underpin their practice are exemplar. And I think we need to draw on those kind of role models and those examples of practice. And we are seeing kind of, some of those ones appearing in the built environment more and more. But the difficulty we have, I think, in the built environment is a set of culture and behaviors. And some of you will understand very much the value engineering. We will value engineering a project that comes with consequences. So I think we need to hold on to the good practice and the good examples that we have Also for me, it's really interesting when I was we started talk as a board member, seeing it from the inside, but also seeing how the Architecture Registration Board is kind of looking at the code. This is about a positive statement for the future. This is just about kind of what professionalism and ethics means to architects going forward. And that's a commitment from all of us. And I think it would be just not for architects, but if any professionals in the built environment. And I think that is really important from me. So it's like, yes, kind of, we've got things wrong, but there is an opportunity to look at as a kind of how the future looks like. And that's where we should hold on.
Great, thank you, Elena. Simon, I'm coming to you on a question now. So somebody has asked, will this change our professional criteria at part 3?
No, I mean, I've just touched on that now. The new competency outcomes, the professional criteria, so there won't be a part 3 in future. It'll be the practice outcomes, and as I said, they have already been changed, and they already require architects to act ethically and in accordance with the code. And students at that final stage of their educational journey will need to demonstrate that they not only understand but do practice in accordance with the code.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, let's just pause the Q&A for a moment there because we've got a couple more polls that we want to do. So if we could make the next poll live, please. So the first question here is, what is the biggest ethical challenge that architects currently have to face? So we're asking you to put in a short answer yourselves on that one. And then we'd like to know who, in your view, the code is for, and we want you to rank them in order of importance. So you can choose between architects, future architects and students, clients, contractors and other built environment professionals, clients and the public. So we'd like you to rank them in order, please. Just leave that poll up for a couple more minutes. It's going to give people 30 more seconds to answer that one. Okay, let's end that poll there and we will come back to the results. So we can't see the answers that you've written to the questions, but we'll come back to those in a moment. And then in order of importance, architects at the top there, future architects, then clients. Let's see where the results came up. Okay, well, let's continue with some of the questions then. We can come back and continue to analyse that poll. So we've had a question here, how would standard 2, and that is in the public interest, that's what that standard is, how would standard 2 be applied in the architect profession in a context where the architect's client or their brief might not function in the public interest? So for example, the example that somebody has given here is to build rent schemes that are unaffordable and unfit to live in. So I think this is getting to the heart of ethical difficulties here. And since it's such a tricky one, I'm going to come to you, Elena.
Thank you, Rebecca. The difficult one. Gosh. So that comes down about integrity and ethics. And that's at the foundation. For me, I have worked with architects, and it comes down to proportionality and balance, I would say. I can't find the word balance better, but I have seen and I have worked with architects that have decided not to work with certain clients because their kind of ethical and their integrity on that would not did not think that was not just for the public interest, it would be for the benefit of the profession. But then what happens? And that's when it becomes really not sometimes you might not be able to afford it or choose your clients. So then it's just how do you influence for change? How do you influence? So, the kind of, I have seen as well people that kind of have tried to influence of how some of that rent schemes could become part of it for a different purpose or become more affordable. So for me, I wish we were in a world that kind of, ethical, the ethics would be driven in some of the decisions about which clients do you work with, for what reasons, and then think about the content, the context that you are working with. But that is when this becomes your own values, your own integrity boundaries, and your own ethical elements about the honesty that you kind of have to kind of work with. Those ones becomes really, really important. Normally in my normal life, even when I'm making decisions about students, my kind of the staff that I would normally work with, or even in other decisions, becomes really important that balance and a proportionate response. And in every decision I would kind of encourage anyone to do is, how can we make the profession better? So I'm not sure, I think I'm skirting around the question because it's almost impossible to answer, but it comes down to your own, what's acceptable and what are the boundaries that you are going to kind of define that you work with, not just with the code, but also in the way that you work.
Thank you, Elena. And I think that really speaks to the structure of the code, because we haven't written a very exhaustive list of everything that people can and can't do. It's more about guiding people towards the right values and behaviours that are expected by the public and by clients, and thinking about how you can approach any trade-offs you might have to adhere to those.
Can I just add something, yeah, Rebecca, to that? I think it's important to differentiate there within the question. I think one of the things was unsafe buildings, and unsafe doesn't go to ethics. Unsafe goes to minimum requirements and the law, and no architect can engage themselves in a building that they know to be unsafe. They've got responsibilities to speak up. I think the other thing is around these kind of ethical grey area questions, and although kind of the requirement is for an architect to be able to demonstrate that they've always acted in the public interest, that often might be competing things they need to balance. What we will try and do in the future is, where we pick out some of those more interesting or more common dilemmas, perhaps produce some case studies about the kind of things that architects might need to take into account. But I think, as Elena says, ultimately it will be for an architect to be always show, well, I took this into account, and in my own professional judgments, this was the decision I came to in order to act to the public interest.
So it comes to taking accountability for one's decisions as well, doesn't it?
That's right.
Cool, thank you. So we've already talked a bit about what happens when an architect experiences disrespectful or difficult behaviour, and I know that you've already both commented on that, but it's a thing that keeps coming up in the questions. So I'm going to read out two more questions that have just been submitted here. One is how to deal with challenging disrespectful contractors when you are alone on site in small residential projects, especially as contractors have no code of conduct to follow or to adhere to. And then a really similar question underneath it, which is saying that code of conducts are very helpful and definitely improve the work of an architect and other professionals. What about contractors who we work very closely with? Will the ARB work to get a code of conduct for contractors who often make it difficult for architects to comply with their own code? So Simon, I'll come to you first on that one, and then I'll come to you, Elena.
That's a really difficult question. So because ultimately it's not for ARB to we don't have the legal mandate in any way to kind of regulate contractors. One thing I would say was one of the recommendations within the Grenfell Tower inquiry report was for there to be the establishment of a overarching construction regulator within the built environment that would have some overarching responsibility for contractors. Now, the recommendation talked about contractors working on higher risk buildings in relation to having them licensed, and with a license would presumably come some kind of regulatory oversight about their own conduct and competence. That might be stretched out, I don't know, but I think the question was in relation to smaller residential things, which is a really difficult thing. I think all we can say in those situations is when other people go low, architects stay high.
Thank you, Simon. Elena, is there anything you'd want to add on that question?
Can you repeat the question, Rebecca? Because it's just it was too long for me to kind of break it down, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I can't repeat it because I've moved it off the screen now, but I can summarize it. It was the first part Simon's already answered, which is, will our try to get a code of conduct in place for other professions? And of course, legally, we don't have responsibility there. So Simon's covered that off. But the other question spoke to a similar point, which is dealing with contractors who don't have their own code of conduct, or indeed the behaviour of other people, particularly if an architect is, say, alone on a small residential site. How would they deal with that sort of situation?
So I have seen as well how some of the engineering council is dealing about the kind of what's a new engineer is. So I think there is a recognition that things need to change across the profession. I think it's the pace of change that is going to be really important, because if you think about it from when kind of, when Grenfell happens to where we are now and where is the future, there is a kind of still a long road to go. For us as well as leading by example. So sometimes it's like if you can see that kind of architect registration board is doing a really kind of a strong job in this sphere, that might kind of lead to other changes as a consequence of that. And we have to not forget that we are going to have to kind of start seeing how the recommendations of the Grenfell Inquiry are taken into the considerations that might lead to kind of much more thoughtful consideration, not just at the architects, but kind of the wider built environment profession. And I think for us is to be ready to showcase and be the exemplar of how we are kind of trying to address some of the kind of challenges that we see that we have got in the profession and the wider built environment.
Thank you, Elena. Before we take a couple more questions, I just want to come to some of the responses that you gave on one of the earlier questions in our poll. So we asked, what is the biggest ethical challenge that architects currently have to face? And I'm going to share some of the comments that you put in there. So one person has said, knowing when to step in, when to make comments in the social setting, and knowing that what you do say could come back to you. Another is saying managing the need to prioritize sustainability with also managing project costs for clients. Sustainability has come up again. That's what somebody else has added as well. When making value engineering changes, ensuring that the quality of the project is maintained as much as possible, and education on the importance of fabric. Somebody has said the role that the profession is not being regulated in lots of countries and the misuse of title. And then we've got more here on material sourcing, making sure that people can specify the right materials. Value engineering is coming up again, sustainability. So it looks an awful lot like the ethical dilemmas that often come to architects around the importance of sustainability, and also the need to meet the demands of clients, particularly on a cost basis. I think it's really positive that nobody has raised a challenge in terms of safety, underscoring the point that you've made earlier on, Simon, that really is a primary thing to come to. So building on that, one of the questions that's come in is about Grenfell. So someone has asked, the Grenfell report recommendations were published following our proposed updated code. In view of this, do we think the new code covers everything that's been highlighted and recommended? So before I come to you on that, Simon, the Grenfell report recommendations were actually published the week before our code, but the person who submitted that question is quite right. There was only so much that we could do in a week, and we had been working on the new code for some time. So Simon, I think the question there is, do we think the new code covers everything that it needs to in light of the Grenfell report?
Short answer is yes, because the code is drafted in a way that's high level enough to capture those elements. Quite clearly, we've looked at the Grenfell Tower report inquiry in a great deal of detail, and in fact, there was a specific recommendation that we go back and review the work we've already done in relation to the findings of the inquiry. So I'd say 2 points. First of all, we're still in consultation, so this code is not finalised by any stretch of the imagination or means. But also, I suspect the issues that are arisen in Grenfell, some of which actually are coming out in these questions in relation to architects' difficult responsibilities under D&B and value engineering, I think we would have to deal with through guidance. And that guidance, of course, hasn't been drafted yet in relation to building safety, in relation to leadership, in relation to managing contractual obligations, elements of that. So it's a really good question. It's a really live topic, and we're really keen to get, to reflect the findings of the inquiry within the code.
Great, thank you, Simon. And I'm coming to you on the next question as well. So somebody has asked, has there been coordination with the RIBA as to how the updated code will intersect with their code of professional conduct?
Yeah, excuse me. Yes, we meet RIBA regularly. We've met with their standards committee. We've worked with not only them, but all the professional bodies, RIAS across the devolved nations. We've spoken to other professional bodies within the built environment to get a broad church of what's going on and what best practice is. It's unsurprising that in actual fact there will be very little difference between the ARB and the RIBA code. I think there is a nuanced difference in the sense of the RIBA is a professional body, is entitled to have higher standards if it wants to for its members. Ultimately, we act in the public interest, so we set the threshold standards that aren't necessarily low, but it is still threshold that every architect must adhere to. In practice, I think it's very unlikely there'll be much by way of difference, though possibly just stylistic.
Great, thank you. Simon, another question that's coming up to you as well now. So somebody has said, many clients don't understand the importance of appointing a qualified registered architect. With so many non-professionals, they put in brackets non-ARB, that are practicing, salaries are being affected nationwide and cannot allow us architects to survive financially. What could be done to address the issue?
Well, I'll tell you what shouldn't be done is to go down to the lowest common denominator, because that, I think, will spell the death knell for the profession. The idea of having a code of conduct, of being a professional, is to say to clients, actually, we operate at a higher bar. We have competence, we have education behind us, we have professional indemnity insurance. We are a profession that you can rely on. And actually, over the past couple of years, I think people are beginning to realise that it's important that architects are competent, that they will act ethically. We've got the whole principal designer regime that's happening, obviously, just in England at the moment. But it will be really important for architects to be able to demonstrate that they can meet those competencies in order to access significant parts of the market. And actually, the impact of the principal designer role, I don't think yet is being fully understood either by the profession or by clients. But I think it's more important than ever that, as I say, architects show that they're keeping their standards high rather than trying to drop down to compete with unregulated plan drawers.
And Simon, just building on that question, somebody else has said, and again, they've seen a RIBA report saying that architects' salaries have reduced, and they're asking what ARB can do about that. So just picking up on the second part of the other question and this question here, is there anything that can be done about salaries and the fees that architects set clients?
I mean, it's a really difficult question. If you look at kind of, from my perspective, when I look at cases that go wrong, it's often because the fee levels are unrealistic, and nobody can possibly provide a competent architectural service for that amount of money. And that's a really difficult message to give, because we know that everyone's under financial pressure. But I think it goes again back to the principle of, you have to stay high, you have to keep your standards high. So in terms of fee proposals, you have to make them realistic. There has to be at some point a recognition within the built environment that you have to pay for quality, and whether that doesn't just apply for architects, that's going to apply across the piece, and possibly that's changing. But I'm afraid we don't have any golden bullet to say that architects should be able to earn more money.
We often get asked why ARB. Yeah, sorry, Sam. We often get asked why ARB isn't setting fee scales, and there's a really good reason for that, isn't there?
It would be illegal.
Yep. So competition law changed since some earlier times, and yeah, it would be illegal for ARB to intervene in that, or for anyone indeed to set those fees. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to come to Elena on the next one. So we've got a question here from Daniel. who says, is the ARB working with other professional bodies in regards to the key standards that architects have? Because the nature of the projects mean that we have to collaborate with other professionals, and the success of projects is founded on multiple designers and professionals. So there is a need for all professionals to align standards and ethics. Elena, do you want to talk a bit about how architects work with others and how we pick that up in the code around communication and collaboration?
So yeah, we actually do talk across kind of different professional bodies in the built environment. I think there is a role for the Architects Registration Board in terms of that communications and see how we can share best practice. And we've done that kind of with the Chartered Institutes of Architectural Technologies, RICS. There's and beyond as well. Other stakeholders become really important, especially students. So kind of the students are asking for more. So that becomes really important. I think also universities or providers that they are providing architectural education have got a tremendously important role to play, especially if they have got other built environment professions. So kind of, in the institution that kind of I work in DUI in Bristol, one of the things we do is we have put 13 professions doing a module together, which is kind of collaborating. And normally we looked at things that Simon deals with, case studies of when things have gone wrong, to understand the profession, to understand the ethics, and also looking at it from different professions. So I think the educational angle of how kind of we kind of showcase best practice from all the professions, from university to once they are the kind of the different professional in practice becomes really important. And I think we do that through best practice. So I think we do it. Could we do it more to break the silos that we have on the built environment industries? Of course, that is like kind of, I think you just have to kind of find really good role models and examples where things are being done and showcase the benefits of what can be done.
Thank you. And Simon, I'll just come to you on that question as well about working with other organisations, because of course you met with quite a few of the professional bodies for other built environment professions when preparing the code.
Yeah, we did. We obviously spoke to all the professionals across the built environment. We also spoke to other professions in kind of in law and medicine to make sure that kind of like we were reflecting the best practice for codes of conduct. In relation to the question of how architects can work across the piece with other professionals, because that's the reality that they do on building projects. I think one of the things is, I mean, one of the findings about, again, coming out of Grenfell is that importance of not only working in collaboration with others, but actually the unique role that architects have to control and manage the work of the project. And we really need to bring that out. I think the role of the principal designer, again, that naturally fits with the competencies architects have. The competencies for that has been worked across the sector in relation to that, and also the kind of the statutory role of designer. So I think that's kind of like, it's going to be a really fruitful opportunity for architects to be able to do that in future.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to come to one more question. If we've got time for another one after that, we'll squeeze it in, but there's 5 minutes left. So first of all, there's going to be a poll that comes up for all of you about whether you found this event useful and whether you would find further events useful. So please do respond to that when we share that with you. And of course, don't forget to take their consultation and to tell us your thoughts. It's been really helpful hearing some of the questions that you're asking today, but of course this isn't the same as the statutory consultation that we're running, so please do respond to that. So I'll come to both of you, Elena and Simon, on this one. So John has asked, has there been some fundamental change to the nature of professionalism that is now an impossibly high aspiration rather than a realistically measurable and understandable concept of reasonable level of skill and care? So I think the question here is the code, or indeed are the expectations on architects impossibly high? Has the concept of professionalism changed such that it is an impossibly high requirement on architects? Simon, I'll come to you first.
Thanks. That's a really difficult question. I don't think they have become impossibly high, but I think unless architects can meet it, I think as a profession, they won't have a place anymore within the built environment. I think standards more generally are raising across the piece, and I think it's sad to say that something like Grenfell made that happen, but it has happened. And the expectations of government, the expectations of clients, the expectations of everyone around are going to, if we're going to improve the built environment to make it a world in which kind of everybody wants to live, then our architects can absolutely have a fundamental place within that. But that does mean that we have to raise the bar continually. So I mean, I spoke at the start of my presentation, I spoke about all the things that have changed since the code was last fundamentally reviewed in 2012, and they are big elements that the profession needs to be able to react to. So yes, it's changed. Yes, I think the bar is higher, but absolutely it's achievable.
Sure, thank you. Elena.
For me, it's like what's right. And I think, I don't think, yes, it's change, but for me, it had to change. So, and kind of not just from the point of view of, I think it's, so when I look at, I remember Dame Jane Hackett, and when she talked about the first inquiry, and I heard this kind of speak really passionately about kind of the systematic failures that she kind of had found. And I remember kind of she saying that, you know, it is our responsibility. So I don't think it's about how high the bar is, it's about getting it right for our future generations, for the public now. I would like to leave the world in a better place, so my son and my kind of, you know, grandchildren in the future are able to kind of make sure that we made the right decisions. I don't think it's about how high it is. I think it feels this kind of is right, and actually we architects and we have one regulator should lead by example.
Thank you, Elena. And then I think there's just time for one final question, which I'll kick off with, and I'll come to you, Simon. So this is a really practical question. So somebody has asked, can you summarise the process of writing the draft standards? And they're interested in both the evidence base and the authors. So I'll start by talking a bit about the process. We looked through previous research we'd done, including surveys of architects asking what was changing about their work. And I'm thinking back to a survey that we published back in 2021, whereby architects told us that safety and sustainability were becoming much more important in their day-to-day work. We also carried out some research into members of the public and small-scale clients about what mattered to them about the regulated profession. And that took both the form of a survey, which was a representative sample of the public, and it also looked at some discussion groups with clients and people who use buildings to understand what they felt was important. And again, the standards really call upon some of the words that came up from that, things like respect, honesty and integrity. And it's another reason why safety and sustainability are more prevalent in this code as well. And then we also spoke to a number of architects and a number of professional bodies. Simon's mentioned the professional bodies we met with, but we also held a workshop online and a conference back in March where we asked architects to talk through some of the language in the new code with us, and indeed draft sections of it. Simon, is there anything you'd like to add about the process we went through to come up with these standards?
No, other than to kind of really accentuate the point that we might hold the pen, but it's not our code, it's the profession's code. We're not going to sit in a silo and in a dark room and create it. So I would hate anyone to think, well, this is a code that's being done to me, as opposed to this is a code that I've contributed to. And as a profession, we've all agreed to sign up to these standards, which is why it's so important that we hear back as part of this consultation. Not just I like, I don't like, but also we would like some more information on this, this and this, or you might want to reconsider your words on that, that and that. That's really important to us.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. That's a really important point. So we've held the conference and we held a workshop, but you can hear through many more people through a public consultation. There is no limit to the number of people you can fit in that room. So please do complete it. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Elena, for answering some really tricky ethical dilemma questions today. I found your answers really interesting, and I hope everybody else on the call has as well. And thank you to all of you for joining us. I hope you found it useful, and we really look forward to hearing your thoughts through the consultation. Thank you.